Delegate Ken Plum. Welcome to our show, Virginia Report. Tonight we're going to return to a topic that we've discussed on many occasions, that is mental health. And we're going to return with a conversation that started with our guest a couple of years ago, Pete Earley. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Pete, you are a former Washington Post reporter, well-respected. You've written 17 books, I think the number is now.
That's right. Yeah.
4 bestsellers.
Yeah.
But we talked many years ago. How many years ago was it that you wrote Crazy?
Actually, it's 10 years ago
10
now.
years ago.
Yeah.
We had you on the show to talk about that book. And we, I guess, are doing a catch-up now to see how things progressed. Your personal story is how Crazy came about. It was a Pulitzer Prize-winning finalist book. It was a book that was well received and helped to create a lot of focus on mental health issues. How did you get to writing the book? And let's then talk about where we are now.
Okay, well, the focus was on the number of people in jails and prisons who have mental illness, which is 16% of folks in jails. And it's interesting that the number of people in jails and prisons is going down. We've realized these are expensive institutions, but the number of people with mental illness is actually going up. It's skyrocketing. And that's because we don't have community support, we don't have community systems. There's a variety of reasons. How I got into it was my son was in college. He was doing well, and all of a sudden he started acting very strangely. I took him to a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist said he had bipolar disorder, put him on medication. My son and I don't want to go into too much detail here, but it's interesting how the system treated him. The very first meeting with a psychiatrist, the doctor said, okay, you have bipolar disorder, you'll probably never work, you'll have it forever, you'll never be cured of it, you had to take medication, they'll make you gain 40 or 50 pounds, you probably will never get married. I mean, he went down this litany because he said, I'm one of these guys who tells it straight. And when we walked out of there, my son said to me, you know, Dad, that guy's crazy. We thought he was. Well, he did quit taking pills after a while, became psychotic. I rushed him down to Fairfax County. He'd been wandering around New York for 5 days. He was convinced God had him on a special mission. Took him to the emergency room because I didn't know where else to go. And the doctor there said, can't do anything. Said at that time in Virginia, he had to be in immediate, imminent danger. This was before the Virginia Tech shootings. And he said, you know, bring him back when he tries to hurt you or someone else. I took him home. He slipped out of the house early one morning. He slipped out. He broke into a stranger's house. Luckily, no one was there. Broke in to take a bubble bath. And all of a sudden, my son was one of these people who was caught in the criminal justice system. My book ends with us being optimistic. He gets 2 years of probation. He gets back on medications, which help him. He's doing great. And then he quits taking his meds as soon as his probation ends. And I call what then was the Mobile Crisis Response Team, and they said, well, is he dangerous? And I said, no, he's not dangerous, but listen. They said, no, you can't blame what happened last time. You have to wait until he's dangerous. Well, the night he became dangerous, I called and they said, well, wait a minute, is he dangerous or violent? I said, he's violent. And they said, we don't come if they're violent, call the police. And the police came and they shot my son twice with a taser and hog-tied him and took him away. Now that is what happened then. But let me tell you, if I may, what's been going on in Fairfax since then. Since then, we've better educated the magistrates about dangerousness. We have started crisis intervention team training, which I know you've been actively supported, which means team training to train the police, law enforcement, and now Sheriff Kincaid's doing it in the jail, how to deal with people with mental illness, how to recognize it's a mental illness, not to come in like Rambo, not to do the authoritative thing, but to listen, respect, and try to, it's difficult to reason with someone who's not thinking clearly, but crisis intervention team training. We have expanded mobile crisis response now. We're setting up more than one for our county, which is huge, retraining those people. So we are making positive steps, and you've been part of that on the state level, trying to get money for crisis intervention team training, mental health dockets, which is a controversial subject, but we have 7 of them here in Virginia, and we're working to get one in Fairfax. So progress is being made.
to take your story forward into another family circumstance, we remember the story of Senator Deeds and his son. There was a situation of where his son was violent. He tried to get him help. There was no place for him in the inn. They go back home and he attacks his father with a butcher knife before he kills himself.
That's right.
And there was a shortcoming of, again, interpreting the need for the sons needing treatment and having that treatment available right at that point in time. And then also this complicated, and we don't want to oversimplify the difficulty of deciding when someone is mentally ill, acting out, as opposed to someone who is in fact has criminal intent. That's not an easy task, but that's what the training's about. Right,
that's part of it. With the Deeds case, there's several interesting things because we had known for a long time, because institutions in the 60s and 70s were so horrible, we wanted to close them all down. And the federal government went after that, and the state went after that. And we all know that we succeeded in closing them down. Virginia still has a higher percentage of people in institutions than many states. But we never created that community safety net. And the problem with the Deeds case everybody focuses on was there was no communication about where a bed was available. I think it's shocking. Fairfax, with the largest jurisdiction, one of the wealthiest jurisdictions, I think last year had to send 300 people out of Fairfax because there were no beds available. But if you look, the Deeds thing is important in another way, Ken, because what it showed was there was no local bed available. But at the same time that he was being turned away, there were 150 people sitting in state institutions who were ready to leave. They got all the services they could, but there was no place in their community capable. And the reason I like to stress that is, as I've stepped back and spent the last 10 years, I've been to every state except Mississippi and Hawaii. I've been to 5 foreign countries. I'm just getting ready to go to India. And what you learn is you can't look, you can't do the Band-Aid approach. You go, oh, we just need crisis intervention. We train the police, we'll be fine. No, you also have to have the courts. You also have to have housing. You have to look at the continuum. You have to have job training. You have to give people hope. So it's this long thing, and that's where it gets frustrating because we tend to piecemeal it. And we tend to say, okay, someone died, Natasha McKenna died in our jail. She got repeatedly stunned, so let's just train those officers. Well, that's good, but what should have happened back here? You know, we're launching Diversion First in Fairfax. It's so exciting. Diversion First started in January. And right now, the police officers, I think the last time I saw the chief's report, they diverted 500 people who could have been arrested for things like trespassing or they're minor crimes that, you know, a person does when they're psychotic. They didn't arrest them. They diverted them into treatment. So that's the first stage. And then Diversion First now, there's a big argument going on because prosecutors don't want to let people off the hook. Like you just said, they got to look beyond, is it criminal, was it mental health or whatever. But the next stage is seeing people who get arrested. And for instance, like a common is you approach a person with mental illness and they're delusional. And perhaps they think the police officer is an alien or whatever. And the police officer gives them an order and they spit at them. Well, that's simple assault. Or they don't listen to them. Well, that's assault. So you get arrested. Do you really want to pay the money to put this person through the criminal justice system and have them just be released and not getting any better? Or do you want to try to divert them? But that gets very complicated. Prosecutors don't like necessarily to say, okay, why are we cutting this person a break just because they have a mental illness? Defense attorneys like to claim everything's a mental illness. And at what level do you say, okay, we're going to accept trespassing, but we're not going to accept first-degree murder, obviously. You know? So you have to work out those details, but we're making progress, and the sheriff has committed it. In Fairfax, Sharon Bulova has been a real champion in this. John Cook has been leading the. So on the local level, we're really making progress, which is exciting.
And part of that diversion comes about because we have the capability now of the Crisis Intervention Center that we're going at Woodburn.
Yeah.
How is that working?
Well, we opened up this new facility, Merrifield Center. This is a huge building, and we opened what's called a crisis center. That's sometimes called drop-off centers. And the idea is, don't take someone to an emergency room where they're already and they're ill-equipped for that.
Right.
A lot of doctors are excellent emergency physicians, but know very little about mental illness. And don't take them to jail, for God's sake, because that studies show that's just going to make it worse. Mm-hmm. You're going to get caught in this system, and you're never going to get out. Because what happens is you're going to get arrested for simple assault. You're going to be put in jail. You're going to throw urine or feces. Then you got more charges. You're going to hit somebody. You're going to get them fight, and pretty soon you're just caught in this thing. Sure. So at the Merrifield Center, they have people who assess and try to figure out where you can be best helped and see if you're. And what's also very exciting about Merrifield is they're beginning to use peers. And to finish my personal story, my son finally got the help he needed. He got a wonderful case manager, Cindy Anderson, and she helped him get into supportive housing because he didn't need to be living with me, and where he paid a part of his rent. And she said to him, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I have a mental illness. What can I do? And she said, no. You can become a peer-to-peer specialist. And this is like Alcoholics Anonymous. You have someone with alcohol. A peer is trained. And so today he actually works on a jail diversion team for Fairfax County as a peer specialist. Wow. And so people will come in and they're in the middle of crisis and they're scared. And you have a peer who's there. They're not therapists. They're not psychologists. They just simply say to the person, look, I've been here. I got arrested. Right. I got tasered. Yeah. Let me calm down. Let's talk about what's going on. And we've discovered that even when a person is psychotic, if they're treated with respect, if they have somebody who listens with them and doesn't argue with their delusions, you can't argue someone out of a delusion. If I think that if you think that I'm a threat to you, nothing I say is going to change your mind. Right.
And you're going to communicate that
right.
through various body language
right.
and so on. Yeah.
And so this person is part of the team where they go in and say, look, I know what you've been through. I've been here. What can we do to? And that's a huge step, because even today I'm on a task force that's helping the Deeds Commission. We have the Deeds and Delegate Bell are looking at the mental health system statewide. Right. And I'm on a task force for that. And, initially there was no member, no peer, no person with mental illness on that commission because people don't think about that. And then we've got one on. And of course, Deeds and Delegate Bell were thrilled to do that. But we tend not to think about that. We tend to call the experts rather than the person with mental illness who's been through it. And that, to me, is foolish. It's like asking me to describe what it's like to be a delegate in the assembly for years and years and years. You know that much better than I ever will.
That's just too long a story to tell.
But you've been so successful. That's what's nice.
Well, Pete, it sounds positive for Fairfax.
Fairfax making steps.
The Merrifield Center, we take a look, we do a triage kind of approach to looking at these folks and figuring out what's the best way to go. Do we have adequate diversions? Do we have places to go?
No. Fairfax County, last I heard, we have 30,000, we need at least 30,000 supportive housing units. Now that's the problem in Fairfax. But it's also a problem pretty much statewide. We have two issues we're dealing with in Fairfax that really need attention. One is housing. You can't, my son was on a list for housing for 5 years, which is common. You have to wait 5 to 17 years. And then when he got on it, because he was working, his rent was still about $1,200 a month. And that's just very difficult for someone who's making $30,000 a year, or $40,000. And that's not just mental health. This is an expensive county.
Right.
And we have people who don't, are working 2 jobs and still can't afford to pay that. So we have to look at housing and how that fits in. The second thing that we have a problem with is we are very reluctant in Fairfax. The prosecutor's office is very reluctant of any of these boutique courts. And that's true across all of Virginia. We've been very slow at setting up these courts. And part of the reason is drug courts or mental health courts meet a lot of skepticism from, we're a very conservative state, and people just go and look and say, well, why are we cutting this person a break? They break the law, they should serve the time. And you have to understand that mental health, like my son didn't ask to be mentally ill. And we don't know what causes mental illness. We know that medication can help, and therefore we think that these are biological genetic illnesses. And that makes a difference. And what you talked about early is criminality and intent. I mean, my son didn't break into a house to burglarize it. He broke in because he felt dirty. He felt like he was unclean. He had to wash himself, purify himself. So he chooses a house at random and he breaks in to take a bowl bath. But if you look, he was charged with breaking and entering with destruction of property and burglary. I mean, that's what the law is. So, you know, those mental health courts give you kind of that option to say, a kid had never had broken the law. So what is the purpose of sending him into a criminal environment where statistically shows he'll end up worse when he comes out than when he went in?
Tell us what supportive housing looks like. What is it, a group home situation?
So glad you asked that. What we've discovered nationally, and there's an 80%, look, I get excited about this. The LAMP project in LA takes people who are homeless, and people who are homeless and have serious mental illness eat up a huge amount of services, jail time, all these kind of services. What they discovered is if you take that person off the street and give them what's called housing first. Now, what's housing first? It's different than government programs. Government programs require you to be clean and sober. They say, we're not going to rent you a place as long as you're psychotic. Housing first reverses that. It says, look, in order to help you, you need a roof over your head. You can't get better under a bridge. You can't get better eating out of garbage cans. We're going to put you in an apartment, and then we're going to backdoor services in. We're going to ask you to meet with a treatment team at least once or twice a month. You'll have to pay a third of whatever you get, because a lot of folks who are homeless get disability. They just spend it the wrong way. And what they discovered is 80% recovery rate. People want a safe place to live. It's Maslow's hierarchy. It just how can you, if you spend all your day trying to find a safe place to live? And then they backdoor services in and say, okay, why don't you take medication? Why don't you participate in these programs? How can we help you? Would you like to work? And then we have creative job programs in a lot of states where they go, okay, Pete, you can't work a 40-hour-a-week job because you're hearing voices. But you could work 2 hours in a mailroom, and then we'll send Ted in, and then we'll send, and you'll get some, because we've discovered that jobs, having a purpose in life, it boils down to a safe place to live, a purpose in life, and people who love you. And those are kind of the three things that we find are important to helping a person recover, or at least do better than what they're doing now. And in the long run, these programs actually save money. The problem is that it's the long run. You got to spend the money up front, and few politicians are as courageous as you, where they go, okay, in 2 years I'm going to get thrown out. I'm especially going to get thrown out if I vote to raise taxes to pay for a program that isn't going to help us for 5 years.
So is Fairfax adopting the housing first approach?
We have some housing first models.
Okay.
It gets more complicated when you talk about housing. It gets very complicated, as you know, because you can talk about vouchers, but you can also talk about discrimination against persons. For instance, in public housing, do you really want to give somebody in public housing an apartment if they're coming out of jail or prison? And this is a big need. And, you know, especially if you have choice, you may say, no, I don't want to give that person, or no, we don't allow people like that, or no. We discovered that in some states, they forced the public housing to say you have to take a person who's coming out of jail and prison. But if that person violates their parole, then they throw them out and they throw their family members out. I mean, it gets thorny. It's a thorny issue. But yeah, we have some housing program. We need more. We need more housing first.
It sounds positive. We're on the right direction in Fairfax. But let's turn now to the state, and you're working with the Deeds Commission that came about as a result of Senator Deeds' experience. It over the years, it's been several years now, it's made some recommendations. Do you feel as positive about what's happening at the state level?
Well, they still have, I think, another year or two to come up with their report. The frustrating thing about Fairfax, or state of Virginia, and also Fairfax, is these are not new issues. You can go back in Fairfax, and more than 15 years ago, we had a blue ribbon panel that said this is what should happen. And none of it happened until we had a tragedy, which was Natasha McKenna, who ended up an African-American woman, 37-year-old schizophrenia in our jail, who was repeatedly stunned and died. And then everybody went, oh, wow, you know. And the same is true. It's frustrating because after Virginia Tech, we had a blue ribbon panel discussion. So the question is, how do you take those, learn for those, and implement those? And the Deeds and Bells are taking a serious look at it. I think Delegate Bell's a little skeptical of mental health courts, but we're trying to look at how to keep people out of jails and prisons, how to get those who don't belong there into the correct services, and how to provide services across the state. It gets very tricky. Let me give you a quick example. In Virginia, many jails don't even ask a person if they have a mental illness.
Correct.
And so you have no database to see how many people there are. And others, they contract out services, and some they say, wait, the Community Service Board should provide that treatment. And so then there's a fight between who's going to pay for it. Is the jail going to pay the Community Service Board? Is community service? So the devil's always in the details, and these details are things that they're hopefully looking for to try to figure out. We've had another tragedy recently, a 24-year-old boy over in Hampton Roads Regional Jail, and they're looking at that in particular because of how does somebody starve to death in jail for 101 days when you have somebody who's supposed to be watching him. In fact, in that case, between the correctional officers and the nurse, somebody was supposed to be watching him 46 times a day. Well, how's somebody lose 50 pounds and nobody noted? So that speaks to, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but we tend to think people with mental illness deserve what they get, and they're marginalized. They're really not people. You know, back in the 1800s, Dorothea Dix started the whole movement to treat people with mental illness as people who were ill rather than prisoners. And the famous story is she goes to Boston to a jail to teach a Bible class, and she discovers part of the jail has no heat. And she goes to the jailer and says, these people are freezing. He says, no, they're not people. You don't understand, they're lunatics. They don't feel the cold. And unfortunately, we tend, if you're a person with severe mental illness, people think, well, they must have done something to deserve this. So it's their own fault. And that carries over. If you're in jail, you deserve to be there. And whether schizophrenia led you to it is immaterial. And we have to get over that attitude and look at, as you've so wisely said, the intent.
You're involved at the federal level also with the national NAMI.
Right.
We only have just a minute or so, but tell us how you see the federal movement going.
Well, we're going to have a bill that's stuck in Congress right now. It was just shooting ahead in the Senate and the House because everybody wants to do something. And both sides finally agreed. You know, politics is compromise. It didn't have everything some of us wanted, and it had some things that, but it hit an issue. It hit an issue about 2 weeks ago. We're running out of time for this session now, but it hit an issue because people wanted to attach gun legislation to it. And as soon as you attach gun legislation to something, it pretty much killed it. But there are steps being made to do more for crisis intervention team training, mental health courts, diversion programs, and also trying to figure out, HIPAA language. I mean, it gets very complicated. The problem is we still have never addressed in this country the thing that led to my son being arrested and the thing you first mentioned that nobody wants to tackle, nobody knows how to solve, which is when do you intervene? When do you say, I think dangerousness is a stupid criteria, but what do you use if you don't use dangerousness?
And Pete, we're going to have to leave it there.
Yeah, it's a big question.
It's a big question mark. But thank you for the work that you've done nationally in bringing to their attention the issue of mental illness, and also the work that you're doing in Fairfax. I appreciate very much the positive report, and I trust that we're going to continue to make progress in Virginia. So thanks again for being with us.
Let's hope so. Thank you.
My pleasure. Join us next time on Virginia Report. So long, everybody.